Hello, everyone, and welcome to a fantastic new episode of the StudioMEcast. I am joined today in the speakeasy here at StudioME with James Critchfield. He's an actor, singer, performer. He and I have known each other for a long time, and I had the pleasure of seeing him play tevye in Fiddler on the Roof, a stage production of that. And we're going to be talking about this classic musical and story and this character, and we'll see where it goes. But for now, Jim, thanks so much for joining me today.
Oh, it's great to be here, Peter. Thanks for asking.
Oh, yeah, I'm really glad that we were able to do this. You know that I played tevye in high school.
Right.
I hadn't really revisited the musical at all until I went to see this production. I saw your Facebook post about it, and my wife was out of town, and I was like, oh, I could actually go to this. I have some time here, and I went. I'm really glad I did.
Oh, great.
Yeah, it's, first off, just Fiddler on the Roof is a classic, not a hot take to say that.
Absolutely. Ted Hoover, who reviewed it several times before whenever I did it, he called it a battleship of a musical. It's one of those that everyone knows. If they know musicals, they know Fiddler on the Roof. And most people respect it. And even to this day, even though it's, 1964 when it first opened on Broadway. And most people still consider it viable, especially nowadays when you think about what's happening in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Fiddler on the Roof, if you don't know the story, basically it happens in 1905, which actually right now is called Ukraine, but it was part of Russia. And isn't it interesting what's happening in Russia, Ukraine right now? The story is that these people in a very small shtetl, it's a little small neighborhood where these very poor Jewish people live, are kicked out of Russia. At that time, Ukraine was part of Russia, and they were kicked out, so they had to go everywhere. Some decided to try to go to the United States. Some decided to go to the Holy Land, Israel, and or Poland, or wherever they can go to find a place to live. So that's basically the story of tevye, the central character, and his 5 daughters. Shalom Aleichem was the original writer of these stories back in the late 1800s, and some people in Broadway thought, wouldn't it be a great idea to try to make a musical out of these stories? So they came together and they made Fiddler on the Roof.
I think one of the things that you just said there that makes this such a classic is it always has something to say. It had, with everything that's going on now, when it came out in the 60s, you had we had just come out of the Second World War, a couple decades before, and there were all kinds of wars going on in the Middle East at that time, and with the Cold War, it's but in today, things that are happening in Ukraine, things that are happening in the Holy Land now,
right.
And for anyone who hasn't seen Fiddler on the Roof, this is your one spoiler warning. We're going to talk about everything. The end of that musical, I'm jumping to the end, but when the different characters are coming and talking about where they're going, and it's just, I don't think I've seen a production of this where there wasn't this tense stillness in the air with what's happening, of all these people who are leaving, and when you know the history of where they're going, like the ones who say, oh, we're going to Warsaw, Poland, and it's they're going to die in camps.
Right.
You have tevye and his family who are going to America.
Hopefully they get out of it, right? It's loosely based on real people, but there was really, as far as we know, there was no true tevye. It wasn't like it's a biography kind of musical. It's just loosely based on people that lived there, and of course there was a milkman, but his name probably wasn't tevye.
It's one of those fictional stories that happened countless times.
That's right, yeah.
And I love that it's so much of it's about the culture and changing times and how unique this culture is, but how relatable the characters are, because cultures may change, and that's a big part of what it's about, but people don't, you know. I remember in high school talking with some of the people in the production who weren't, like, as we were learning the musical, arranging marriages, and the way that the dad is dominating everything, but then you see what the relationship between him and his daughter is really like. You know, when she's like, I don't want to marry him, he's like, okay, I'm not going to make you do that. Or with Golda, and I think the Do You Love Me is probably, for me, the best musical love song that I've, beautiful. You know, except for maybe a particular song in Camelot. But it's how, so it's also is a huge cast. It's an entire village of people, but decidedly tevye is the main character.
Oh, good Lord!
How did you just even start with this? Had you been in this production before? And
well, what helped was I'm 62 now. And back when I was about 19 was my first experience with the show. I had known of it. I had heard Matchmaker before then, before I was 19. And I think I heard If I Were a Rich Man before. But I got a chance to do the show at CCAC South Campus, Allegheny Community College. And I played Fietka, the young Russian. And I fell in love with the show whenever I started working on it and doing it. And I did the show, and I hadn't seen him since then, but I still remember his name. His name is Dan Gribben, who played the role of tevye back then. And I was looking up to him, and I was thinking, oh, that's amazing. And I never really thought that I'd ever play that role back in those days. I was just thinking, boy, he's quite amazing. He was an older man who had done the role before many times, and he was well known in the area for playing the role. And we did it then, and then I did it again in my mid-30s whenever I played Laser Wolf, the butcher, for a production down at the Byam Theater for Pittsburgh Musical Theater Gargaro Productions. And then in 2007 and 2008, I did it for Pittsburgh Musical Theater as tevye. I played tevye then. So this was my fifth opportunity to be in the show, and the third opportunity to play tevye. So I knew it pretty well, but it was almost 15 years previous when I played the role before. So it took a while to get some of those lines back in my head.
Wow. What do you think was, or was there much of a difference or development between this time and the previous time that you filled the role? It's 15 years is a while.
Yeah. I want to answer that question, but it comes to mind that I wanted to also mention that there was some other people that I had opportunities to play the show with. Howard Elson had played tevye before when I played Laser Wolf for Pittsburgh Musical Theater, and he was well known in the Pittsburgh area, still is. He was a local pediatrics dentist, and he performed professionally, still does, locally and across the East Coast. So shout out to Howard. He's still alive and still kicking, and is a good man. And I was blessed to have the opportunity to perform with him. And then I played tevye those three. And you said 15 years. How I approached it this time was that I always have felt like, as a performer, you put yourself. Stanislavski wrote the magic if, or the method of acting, and one of the main parts of Stanislavski's book, which is interesting, he's a Russian, is the magic if. What would I do if I were in this situation? Sometimes people think that acting is reaching for a muse and trying to become something you're not. But what I believe the true challenge for an actor is to put yourself into that situation, to make it as real as possible, put those situations into you, and then decide, how would I react to this if I grew up in the Ukraine area in a very ghetto little neighborhood where most of the people looked down upon us as being Jewish, and we have very stern beliefs about how we should live our lives, and we love those stern beliefs, and they are important to us. And no matter how much the outside world wants to tell us what to do, we are still going to do the things we believe is correct. Maybe much like the Amish today, right? In maybe the closest parallel that we can think of here locally in the United States. So how did I approach it? Well, I decided that I was going to place the love I have for the people around me as my biggest and most important part in my life. The love I have for people, the love I have for my daughters, the love I find out later that I actually truly have for my wife. But maybe at first, there's this relationship that is confrontational often in the musical. But then toward the end, like you said, with Do You Love Me, it shows that there is a true partnership and a love and a friendship. You call upon each other for advice, even though you believe you're the master of the house. In a lot of ways. No, you're not. She has a big say in a lot of things that happen. So
he can get in trouble.
He can definitely
and he
get in
doesn't
trouble.
want to be.
Yep. But there were 5 daughters, so there was something there, right? It wasn't just worrying about making children. There had to be a closeness, I would think. So the love he has, not only for his family first and foremost, but also for God. He constantly talks to God. There was a point in the rehearsal process when the director and I were, director Nick Nemec, who directed the show this time, beautiful job, I thought, on a very small stage, and he was able to make it really quite intimate and interesting. And I think you might agree that the direction of the piece was very smooth. And but
because it's a big book. There's a lot of songs, there's a lot of people, and it's easy for that thing to lose its momentum, or on the flip side of that, you overdo it and it feels rushed or something. But no, I thought the pace that was there was really good for the production, because it also let it be that when you had a moment that needed to slow down, it had that impact. Because it would be very easy for that show to drag if you're not thinking about it. It could, because there's so much there, and a lot of it's like there's one guy talking for a while, and if you don't have the right guy in that, But when the show comes to life, it's those magical things where you just love learning about this guy and these people and all the little things he says. Like, there's so many clues to the thing he wants most in the world, it seems, is when he sings "If I Were a Rich Man," is he wants to have more time to sit in the synagogue and pray. Well, he prays all the time, but he wants to be in the synagogue, and he wants to, discuss the holy books. He wants to learn more about this, but even though he doesn't have time to do that, he does he does what he does. He does the best he can with it, I think.
Absolutely. So and with the whole importance of God in Tevye's life, I was bringing up an idea that the director and I were having a conversation during the show rehearsal, and he says, isn't it interesting that after the scene with the third daughter, Chava, who each of the daughters decide to marry outside of the traditions of, like you said earlier, of the marriages being arranged by either the matchmaker or the papa. The first daughter gets married off to somebody who she decides she wants to marry instead of who the father decides. And the second daughter, same, but actually he's moving away, and tevye doesn't want her to go, but then she has to go anyway. And then the third daughter, who actually decides to marry outside of the faith, not only outside of the tradition, but outside of the faith. She decides to marry one of the locals in the town that wasn't part of their little neighborhood. So the conversation that I had with the director, Nick, was, after tevye decides to cut everything off with Chava, the third daughter, she is dead to us. Isn't it interesting that in the book he doesn't talk to God anymore at that point? But my decision was that isn't a clue for us to decide that he decides to go away from God. He is in constant conversation with God throughout the show. Sometimes the audience gets a chance to hear his conversation, sometimes they don't. And my feeling was, and even at the end of the show, if you caught it when you saw it, after the fiddler is there and he says, "Come and follow me," as if to say, traditions come with me, the fiddler come with me. The way the show is written, if you haven't seen it before, there's a fiddler that follows tevye throughout the show at different points in the important parts of the show, where the fiddler is there and it's tevye's struggle with tradition. So at the very end, when he says, "Follow me," and tevye starts to pull the cart away, and he stops. And he looks up at the same place that he always looked up at in the show and smiled and nodded like, okay, here we go. And that was the last thing that happens in the show, is that there's this moment between God and tevye before he leaves with his wife and two daughters that are much younger, off to go to America if they make it.
I think that's wonderful. That's a great interpretation too, because one of the things that I love so much about live theater is, if you make a movie, you make it once and it's pretty much done, and
Right.
people do special editions and all that, and you can still interpret films in different ways. That's true. But when you have a musical or a play, you can change the meaning of so many things. And even with the Cossack who marries the third daughter, it doesn't say, I don't think, in the book what he's doing during the wedding. It's like, and different people interpret it different ways. Like, oh, well, we might have him off to the side and kind of stop a guy a little bit, like, hey, that's enough to kind of give you a clue, like, this guy's a good guy. But maybe he's not there at all. Maybe he is there and he's participating, and then after that is when maybe he starts to think, actually undergo a change. Like, maybe this guy did used to be a bad guy,
right.
Or like however you want to phrase it. Maybe he did do that, and then, a lot of the other characters' arcs are kind of off stage. There's a lot that happens off stage in this musical too. It's like you've got the entire communist revolution going on
right now
in this. And one of the things that I realized this time around, I don't remember if I realized this when I was in the show. I hope I did. But the fact that tevye has an idea of what's going on out in the world. There's plenty of people who don't. There's entire scenes devoted to people getting confused or
Exactly.
misinterpreting or whatever happens, but he knows what's happening out in the other parts of the world, and he knows how dangerous it is for them.
Which is
well.
unique, because we had a long conversation about this, about what we know and what we don't know. And, in the United States, we think about, it's quite rare when somebody comes into your circle of people that you know that can't read. But most of the people in that shtetl wouldn't read. There was a bookseller. There is a bookseller, and some people did read. But any time that there was something that needed to be read, we actually went to Avram, the bookseller, and asked him to look at it. When there was when the edict was given to me at the end of the show that you have to leave your homes in 3 days, I'm looking at it, but then as soon as Avram comes up and talks about it, I give it to him to look at. I believe that Tevye might be able to read a little tiny bit, but when he says, even in Rich Man, and I discuss the holy books with the learned men, because they can read it.
Wow.
Not because I can read it. And the rabbi, we put so much on him because he can read the holy books. He is one of the most learned men in town. And that was one of the things we talked about a long time whenever we were at the beginning of the process of learning the show, that there was only a few people that probably and you know, that probably could read. And then also the fact that Tevye's daughter Chava, the third daughter, actually is intrigued by reading, and she often goes to the bookseller, and that's why Fietka, the Russian, notices her. That's a girl that actually is interested in education, interested in reading.
And she got that education from Perchik, which Tevye is like, hey, food for lessons good to get his daughter, because he understood the value of... Yeah.
And that's why he liked Perchik so much, even though Perchik was the rebel, the second suitor to the second daughter. He liked Perchik a lot because he was, not only because he was a free spirit, but also because he was educated. And Tevye looked up to that, something that he actually aspired to or would love to have had the opportunity to be, even though he didn't.
I think it's there's so many ways to interpret and little clues throughout the whole thing for all the characters, even just the subject of whether Tevye you touched on it before, with whether Tevye and his wife love each other, like they haven't really figured that out, but they have 5 daughters, so they must get along sometimes, you know.
Right.
But then on the other hand, it's like, well, they have 5 daughters. Well, maybe there's the implication there, and he says it when he's had a few too many drinks, something that maybe he'd never admit, maybe never even tell Golda. He's like that he always wanted a son. And, of course, one a little younger than myself, you know.
Right. And the fact that it's patriarchal, at least according to the men in that existence, you know, they will hand down the business that they are doing to their sons, you know. And if they don't have sons, then what happens to their business, you know? Because the daughters will go off and marry other men who have their own businesses, you know. So it's a different culture than what we're used to here in the United States. Yeah.
I think the other thing that really is, you know, immortal in the show is the humor. Oh yeah. It's funny, like whether it's him going to Laser Wolf and thinking that this is about selling his horse or cow to be butchered, you know, but really it's about a marriage,
right.
or just the little funny bits of Tevye getting a verse wrong here and there, but even just little wry moments of when he sings and says that it won't matter if I answer right or wrong. When people ask me for my opinion, everyone's going to fawn on me, you know. And he says, but when you're rich, they think you really know. And he's like, well, Tevye's not rich. But, you know, he's kind of like got this, I don't know, outside of himself. Like he's not educated. And he doesn't have time to do the things that he wants to, you know. But he's a very smart guy. Yeah. And throughout the show, it's also, I realized more, to the people in his life, they might not realize how much of a deep thinker this guy is. You know, they might think, oh, Papa's just traditional. Oh, he's going to get mad at you. Oh, he's going to do this. This is how he feels about this. But the inner monologues he has and the way that he talks with God has this, like, secret depth to him that he's immersed in all day, you know?
Right.
And he works alone. That's another thing. Like, they could have had the character be someone who maybe is around other people. Like, they didn't have a factory in Anatevka, right? But no, he could have been around more people while he's doing his work. But he's by himself most of the time.
Right. And he's just out on the road delivering his milk and cheese and whatever else. Yeah. right.
And his horse is busted the whole time, which
I think that was an opportunity. If you see the movie, you see him with a horse early on, and that's played by Topol. The original Broadway production was Zero Mostel who originally played the role, but for the play, it made it easier for the playwrights to decide that we're not going to put a horse on stage. So let's decide that throughout the show he's just pulling his own cart, and that makes it even harder. There's even something more to put in front of tevye, and an obstacle to try to encounter and get past. But yeah, throughout the whole show he's pulling his own milk cart that's supposed to be pulled by a horse. Yep.
And then he's like, I know, I'll push it for a while.
That's right. Yeah.
I think it's a very light show for a good portion of it.
Oh, yeah.
You know, like, I mean, he's got serious problems, you know, but there's humor. Their life goes on. But there comes a point, I mean, there's the wedding, which just comes out of nowhere and hits you with, like, and it goes on for a bit where you're like, oh, we're dancing, we're singing, and you've, like, for me, I forget every time what's going to happen.
Right.
And then the Cossacks come out and just trash the place. And it's like, man, this is supposed to be like a day that's full of the best memories of their lives, and now it's like one of the worst things that ever happened to them. And the entire tone of the show changes. And there's like moments where they bring the humor back, but at the end, when the edict comes out, at its or even before that, when tevye cuts it off with Chava.
Right.
You know, it's, you know, it, like you said, he doesn't have another conversation that we know of with God in it.
The story, anyway. Yeah.
It just it just comes out of nowhere,
it sure
almost,
does.
and it hits. That's one of the things that I also want to say about the production is that the emotional beats, all of them, like, landed. You know, there's with any production, I think it was Peter Jackson when he was making King Kong. He said, when you make a movie, there's some things you gotta compromise. The weather might not be perfect. A certain set might not be the way you want it. Costume, you might not get the actor you really wanted to have. Whatever. He says, but if your movie's named King Kong, then the monkey better look real good.
Better make it right.
And I think the direction that the show took, just making sure that the heart of this show was beating throughout it is like, it's like the entire cast and those people behind who aren't on stage perhaps, you know, really seem to understand like what this show is really about, which is, you know, is what you want.
Yeah. Oh,
so,
yeah.
Now, when did you start? How long was like rehearsal and all that? When did you start production, like beginning to end? What was the schedule?
Long story short, when I first heard that the Heritage Players, and so, a friend of mine who actually is the president of the group, her name is Nicole Zalek. She and I know each other from the Pittsburgh New Works Festival. Heritage Players have been doing a one act every year for many, many years. And I called her and said, I don't know if I want to do this, but I'm just throwing it out as an opportunity for conversation. If we want to consider if it's a good fit for you, if it's a good fit for me, what would you think if I came and helped you with Fiddler, playing tevye? Long before auditions, long before they even had contracted a director. And we had a really nice talk, and then she talked to the board, and she and I both had a nice talk again and said, you know, if you're willing, we're willing to consider that possibility, because I had done it before, and, you know, you don't pick to do Hello, Dolly, and you don't have a Dolly. Or,
right.
or you don't pick Man of La Mancha and you don't have a Don Quixote. And that's the same thing with Fiddler on the Roof. You have to have at least somebody in mind that can actually take on such a role like tevye. So that was, oh man, that must have been in January, February of last year. and we performed in November. And once everything was decided, and the company said, well, let's hire a director first, and we'll put that out to the director to see if he is interested in considering working with you. And I said, okay, we'll do it. And, and I talked to Nick, and Nick and I had hit it off right away. I didn't know Nick beforehand, and so we decided to do it. And then they had called for auditions. Thinking auditions were in June or July. No, July, and then we had a longer rehearsal process than usual. Usually, if you're in a musical, you're rehearsing for 4 to 6 weeks, and then you perform the show. Nick decided to stretch the rehearsals out more and have maybe 2 or 3, two night rehearsals and maybe an afternoon on a Saturday, and stretch it out for people that actually have a lot going on in their life anyway, that most people, work a full-time job, and to try to do this, what I used to do professionally all the time, you would rehearse during the day and then perform at night. Most people in community theater can't do that. Mm-hmm. They have a daytime job. So I think we started rehearsals, November, October. I think it was late August, mid-September, right in there somewhere, we started rehearsals. And then we went all through September, the rest of September, all through October, and then we opened in November. And as we got closer, of course, like Tech Week, we were there every night before we opened. But so it's quite a commitment, but that's kind of what had happened in the rehearsal process. And I got to work with people that, for the most part, I didn't know. There were a couple people, Katie Kerr, who played Seidel. I had known her ever since she was, 8 years old, back when her family ran Apple Hill Playhouse out in Delmont. And also Erin Stetter, she and I have known each other ever since I worked with her mother, Rita Kelly, many, many years ago at CCAC South Campus. And then Erin and I worked together in many different shows. Christmas Carol, when I used to perform Scrooge for Pittsburgh Musical Theater. Mm-hmm. Erin came in and played Golda. So I knew both of them. I don't think, everybody else I didn't know. So it was nice to work with a lot of new people. And we really built a family. It was, I got to know everybody. Even some of the children that just played community members in the show, they weren't Tevye's daughters. Even some of those children, I remember everybody's names, and we had a great time. And it was a real close-knit, tight family. And when we had to say goodbye, it wasn't easy to say goodbye. We were all pretty emotional about it. But that's the way it is in most theater productions. You build a family of trust. You're on stage together in front of a big audience, and there has to be a trust that person's going to know their lines and lyrics and back and forth. And for those of us who've done it a long time, we remember when we first started how nervous we could be in front of a big audience trying to memorize everything you have to memorize, choreography and lyrics and lines and harmonies. And so, we built a beautiful family. And and looking at this playbill, I'm thinking, we closed on the 19th of November. And what's today? Almost a month later. And I'm still thinking about it, thinking, miss those guys.
Yeah, it's the feeling that happens, or the way that closing a show can affect you afterward is something that I feel like I don't hear people talk about as much. It sucks.
It does. It does.
It's like, oh man, couldn't we just do that forever?
And those who actually do it forever, who are on Broadway or in national tours, and they do it for a long time, after a while they kind of go, okay, I'm ready for another challenge now. So there's both sides of the coin. But,
absolutely.
When I did Christmas Carol all those many years, I did 18 different productions, 15 with Pittsburgh Musical Theater, Gargaro Productions. And there came a point where I just said, okay, I think I've done everything I can probably do Maybe the last time I did it was in 2008. Maybe I'll do Christmas Carol again one day now that I'm actually closer to the age of Scrooge. When I first did it, I was 29 years old, and I had to put a lot of makeup on and so on. So, but yeah, I think there comes a point when you kind of go, okay, I'm at saturation now. I'm ready for another experience.
Now, I want to shift gears here a bit because I went to see this, I think, on the second weekend that the shows were happening. And Fiddler on the Roof is about a Jewish community. And the month beforehand was the attack on Israel on October 7th. And, you know, things have been going on there since thousands of years. It's like the Mongols have been there, you know, the Greeks, the Romans, everybody, I think. When I was watching it, that was very present on my mind and gave the entire show an additional dimension.
Oh, it sure did.
And particularly the end of it. It's like you have the matchmaker who says she's going to the Holy Land, you know, and was that something that was that affected the cast?
Oh, without a doubt. You know, when the company decided to do Fiddler on the Roof, it was long before the invasion of Ukraine and long before Hamas invaded Israel. So they had it on their schedule, just they wanted to do Fiddler on the Roof. And then since the time that they decided to do the show, those two major horrific things happened in the world. And I didn't talk to anybody on the board. I'm wondering if they kept saying, no, this is the right show to do right now. This, you know, with all the things that are happening, this is even more prevalent than maybe when we first decided to do it. I don't know if they questioned maybe we shouldn't do the show. I don't know that. I doubt that they did. But whenever we were called upon to do the show and to work as a family to create, recreate this story that was so skillfully written with all those things in mind, it was so palpable to all of us as we were talking about it because it was so fresh for us to see what is the parallel of what's happening in real life right now in the world and what the creators did to talk about those times back in the early 1900s whenever the Jewish people were pushed out of Russia. And maybe that was a precursor to the Nazi movement and how they felt about the Jews, because that was before, whenever Russia decided to get the Jews out. All these Jews are moving around the world, especially in the Europe area. Yeah,
Russia was the anti-Semitic capital of the world until Nazi Germany came along.
And they probably grabbed some of that for Mein Kampf and all that was going on with Hitler. So yeah, when we were in the story and putting it together and talking about it, we had often lots of times. In fact, one of our first rehearsals was an opportunity to not to get on stage and do the show, but talk about what's happening in the show. And we had our dramaturge with us about what life was like back then in this small little ghetto is what it truly was in Russia, in the Ukraine area of Russia. And then not only what our life is like then and what the traditions were about how once a woman was married, she would have to shave her head and she would cover her head. So that's why you weren't supposed to see hair coming out of the hair covering when you saw the show. But the daughters haven't shaved their head yet. It's an attraction thing, you know. Oh, maybe I'll get a man who thinks I'm attractive. But once a woman is married, you cut your hair, and you know you are not to be attractive for another man. So that's one of the many things that were happening in the society, just as traditions, the traditions of the people that were living there, but also what is it like to live in a ghetto where the other people in the town look down upon you, you know? And then what is life inside the ghetto like? You know, sure, we have friendships and sure, we have people we trust, but is everyone there people that you trust? So we talked a lot about that, what life was like there, but we also talked about what was happening in the world then and what is happening in the world now, and how do we, modern actors who are portraying this time in 1905, but knowing what they had to go through, but also what's happening in the world right now with Ukraine and with Israel and all that's happening. And of course, you know, we would be foolish to just say, you know, and not think that our hearts shouldn't go out to the people in Gaza too. You know, they are being controlled by Hamas. And sure, we're getting into politics now, right, and into other things, but
and that's okay. We can.
But when we're looking at people and being concerned about human beings, the poor people in Gaza are also in the middle of this. Like many of them probably had nothing to do with the attack on Israel. And now there's a war in Gaza that all these houses are being destroyed and people's lives are being uprooted. They're poor people there too. So it was quite an eye-opening experience for us to bring ourselves emotionally closer, because as an actor you try to do that. You bring yourself closer to the situation. But then find the humor in it as well. Find the lighter, because, you know, as human beings, we push forward, we push through, and we try to make the best life we can for ourselves and for our families. And that was also our challenge. And I'm glad to hear that we might have done a pretty good job with it.
Oh, absolutely. And it was, just a lot of the getting into a little bit of the politics as it related to seeing the show. Even, you know, you have what was happening to Tevye and his family then. Some people might identify what he and his family's going through, as you said, like similar to what people in Gaza may be going through. Absolutely. And it's like, well, hang on, but these are like, you know, some people do think that Israel is basically playing the role of the Cossack now and smashing the wedding, you know, and some people don't see it that way. They're like, no, these guys, see, they've gotten kicked around forever, and now they finally got a place where at least some people said, hey, this is where, stay here now, and they're like, we're not going to get kicked out of this place. Yeah, so, and of course, that's where it just gets endlessly complicated, and it's the stuff you can think about forever, and, you know, and...
but to have a heart for humans, you know, and the heart for the people that are struggling to live past what the governments have decided to do in the war. Anytime the United States are in a war, it's you and I weren't consulted, right? It's the government who decides to go in and fight the war or not. And not that I'm not a patriot, or not that I am liberal or conservative, just the fact that I'm looking at human beings and the plight that they have to go through, especially whenever that war is happening right there in their hometown, just like it happened in our Civil War in the United States, especially in the states that actually had armed combat, and you never knew if soldiers wouldn't just come onto your property and, you know, decide to take over your home. You didn't know that, and that's what they're dealing with right now. So my heart goes out to all of them.
Yeah, it's also, to bring it all the way back to the musical again, how when you have something that's, that's how I, for me, define what a classic is a classic always has something to say. It's not just something you go, oh, this is what things were like back then. Like, that can be a big part of it. But, you know, you could put on a show of Fiddler on the Roof 200 years from now, and people are going to get something out of it. I think they will. And not all shows are like that. You know, there's plenty of shows that it's relevant right now, and then it comes, it goes, and maybe it's a bit of fun, and there's nothing wrong with that either, you know. There's plenty of movies
That's
that
right.
are like that, but every once in a while you get something that sticks around because it always has something to say. And unfortunately, lately, the things that it seems to be speaking to are things that I imagine most people don't want to have be issues. But maybe that's one of the things that's important to have, something like this. That had to be one of the things that stood out about, as you said, you've done this production more times, 5 times, yeah. But this, that had to be one of the things that stood out for you.
Oh yeah,
this time for it.
Absolutely. And when I mentioned earlier about approaching this, sometimes we try to narrow it down to the smallest denominator to approach it with love, and love for the production, the way it's written, the music, the story that we're telling, but also the people that not only that Tevye encounters, but the people that Jim encountered. And I think that with that said, it was nice to see that it was infectious and we all were reaching out to each other in love. And I think that's a wonderful way of thinking about doing a piece of art.
Absolutely. So, Jim, are there any shows that you're looking at being in or that are coming up that maybe we can let the wonderful, beautiful, loyal listeners know about?
Actually, I've taken on a production of a high school production. I used to direct high school musicals for quite a while. I used to do it at Brentwood High School and at Vincentian Academy, which does no longer exist, but it was up in the North Hills. I directed middle school musicals for Falk School. I used to teach at that school for almost 10 years. I've been asked to come and direct a musical, and I decided I'll come back to some of my roots. I hadn't done it for many, many years at Keystone Oaks High School. In fact, one of my past students, Bill Ibeck, who's the music director he's one of the music teachers there. He directs the band, the marching band, and he also conducts the school musical. He was one of my students at Brentwood High School. And he said, Jim, Mr. Critchfield, Jim, Mr. Critchfield, will you come and direct Keystone Oaks? Are you available? And I actually decided that I would like to do that. Wow. So I'm actually working with one of my past students who is now the music teacher there at the school.
That's wonderful.
And we're doing Anything Goes.
Anything Goes.
By Cole Porter.
Wonderful.
And, I don't do as many shows as I used to do. I used to do 4, 5, 6 7 different shows in a year's time, back when that's what I was doing to make my living. Now I just do it as when I want to. I don't have anything booked, but there are a couple things that I'm looking at that maybe I might do in the future. We'll see how that pans out. But for sure, Keystone Oaks, Anything Goes, and that'll be in April.
Fantastic. Well, everybody, make sure you get your tickets to that. And Jim, it's been a pleasure talking with you
Peter,
about this. And if you ever want to come on again to promote the musical or anything, just
would be great.
Let me know. I love talking about all this stuff and hearing your takes on it, and getting to have some insight on the experience that you had, that I got to see sort of an outside view and enjoy as an audience member and appreciate.
But something that we shared, playing the same role.
Yeah, that too, yeah, absolutely.
The fact that you knew the show better than what most people would know. When you walk into the theater to watch the show, you had a past with this production, and you know what it's all about. And
even with that, there were things that I got to pick up, and I'm like, oh, I didn't notice that before, and oh, that says a lot about the guy. And it was ages ago, so I don't remember too much about what I don't remember everything I was thinking about at the time for the character. I like to think that I picked up on everything, but I was 18. I tried to imagine what it would be like to be a father.
Yeah.
But it was a wonderful experience being in it. It was a wonderful experience seeing you perform It's a big selling point for me is just knowing I was going to get to hear you sing because you got a great voice.
Oh, thank you. I
And,
appreciate that.
But I loved your take on the character. I loved the look that you had for it. Just the whole, you nailed it. From one tevye to another.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
You nailed this interview. Thank you for this.
Well, thank you. It's been my pleasure, and I'd love to have you on again sometime. So we'll make it happen. So.
Excellent. Thanks for the time.
Absolutely. Hey, everybody. Thanks again for pretending to join us for this interview that was recorded at an earlier time, but maybe you got to forget about that for a while and just enjoy a little conversation between two people talking about something that they're passionate about, and hopefully you got something out of it, and we hope to see you on the next one. The door's always open, and hey, come on down to StudioME for a free tour. We rent out spaces, equipment, you know the drill. So, but thanks again for your time. It's you're not getting it back. So thank you. Bye-bye.